So I think some of you know that the intention today was to talk about internal stress. Last week we talked about external stress, external stressors, and Jade and I were talking about all the different situations that might arise and the way that we might perceive those. Now, an internal stress for Jade this week, and the reason why Jade isn't on the call today is because she's got COVID. So she's been sort of dipping into things, and she jumped onto the call and said, and was like, "Should I be here?" And I said, "Just feel into it, what feels right." Um, and of course, you really have to listen to yourself with these sort of situations. And it's one thing jumping on a quick call and speaking for 5 minutes, but holding space is a very different thing. So we decided that we would shift and change everything. So hence, you have got me. And that means it's going to take on a slightly different format, because the reason that Jade and I work really well together is we both come in from different perspectives, but with a very aligned message. And so Jade has come in more from the physical embodied wellness side of everything, and so she looks at it more from regulating the emotions, regulating the nervous system. So when you have those sort of stresses, how you can work with your body to regulate that. But I've always come at it from the mindset perspective. So I'm not more looking at how you regulate your thoughts, and your patterning and limiting beliefs. So it was going to be a combined conversation, but we've decided to do it in two parts. And it's also a really interesting one, because we felt that with what Jade is going through, you can perceive that as an internal. It creates both levels of stress in both ways, because it can become an external stress when you feel that you're not getting things done that you want to get done, when you've got an illness of some sort that is literally stopping you from doing the work you want to do, or having the experience you want to have. And so it can become extremely stressful. However, it all depends on your perception as to whether that becomes an external stressor or not, or whether you really observe from your internal space, and then the stress becomes a different way of experiencing it. Because the way that I've always looked at stress is that we can choose how we experience it. We can choose whether we experience stress or whether we don't. And that might seem a very sort of a throwaway comment, because if people are feeling stressed, obviously it feels very hard to choose not to be stressed in that moment. And of course, it takes time and it takes work to get to that point where you can be in that place of choice as to whether you go into a stress response or you don't. So we're going to look at it today from the mindset perspective. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey in terms of this, how I actually went through an enormous amount of stress and learnt techniques and coping mechanisms in order to deal with that. And a lot of that for me was around doing inner child work and observing my limiting beliefs and observing my programming. So just to give you a bit of background, I was, I would say, very programmed by spending 13 years in a convent. And that was I wasn't there as a boarder. I was there as day school, because it was literally 10 minutes from where I lived. So I went to this school. I wasn't Catholic, but it was a Catholic school. And so, of course, there was an enormous amount of programming and also self-worth situations that came up for me, because I wasn't Catholic. So I was referred to as non-Catholic. And so therefore I had this non-identity. And so you can imagine how that starts to seep into your perception of yourself and your self-worth and your belief. And so I know that a lot of my belief system came around being subservient and having to always be the good girl and you have to be this certain way. So that if you're thinking about it in your own life, you will know that when you're growing up, there'll be all sorts of situations around you, whether it's school, whether it's parents, whether it's siblings. It can be whatever your childhood situation is. That's going to be creating your school of programming, effectively. And up until the age of 7, so in terms of the way that your mind deals with all of this, is up until the age of 2, you're in delta wave state, 18 months to 2 years old, which is pretty much the sleep state, which is why babies pretty much sleep the majority of the time. But once we get to about 18 months, 2 years old, and you can see this transition happen in babies of that sort of age, they transition into theta wave state and they stay in that space until they're about 7 years old. And at that point, what we effectively are is the living embodiment of our subconscious. And so everything we're told, we believe, because we have no ability, because that part of our brain, which is able to rationally think, doesn't exist. And so all we do is believe and trust, and everything we are told, we take on as a truth. But of course, what happens in that space is that if with our astrology, the way that we're born into this world, the blueprint of who we are, the ingredients that make us up, will give us our personality, our core personality to start with, of this beautiful, divine, pure soul that comes in as this baby in its absolute purest essence. And then, of course, what happens is that we start telling that baby who wants to cry and shout and be loud and have fun and white paint all over the walls, that's naughty, you mustn't do that. You're not, that's bad behavior, you mustn't do this. And little girls don't shout and they don't scream and you have to be quiet. And so, of course, every time we hear this, we're creating perceptions of what actually keeps us safe in the world. So all we want to do up until the age of 7, in terms of our subconscious and what we're being programmed, is safety, security, and love. We want to make sure that we're nourished, we're fed, we're loved, and anything that we do that has a negative response towards us, we will shut down, because we don't want to not be loved, not be secure. And so we find coping mechanisms and behaviors that are going to give us attention, and to give us the love that we need. And if we don't feel that we're getting attention by being good, we'll start to do different things that do give us attention, because even if we're not getting good attention, at least that gives us some attention. So I will be annoying and do all those things that parents find their children doing, is because they're not getting the attention that they need. So for me, that was growing up in that sort of convent environment. And also my mum and dad, who were wonderful, wonderful parents, but they had their own personalities and programming. And my mum was the very stereotypical subservient wife, and my dad was a staff sergeant in the army when he was younger. So you have this dynamic playing out. So of course we create these programs. And so then what you end up with is this version of yourself, which becomes, when you start to have the ability to critically think, and you start to then use basically that as your foundation to who you are. And so when you're starting to go into your teens, you are then starting to adopt this as your truth, as your personality. That's who you are in the world. And you don't realize that actually that version of you isn't actually you at all. It's completely masked under, the real you is completely buried underneath all of these programs and these coping mechanisms to keep us safe and loved. And then, of course, we start to go through our teenage experience, where we want to be accepted and loved and liked by our peers and by boys or girls, depending on, whether you're male or female. And so it starts to show up in different ways. And I went through most of my adult life as a very much copying the programming of my mum, being the mum, the wife, always the people pleaser, the person who always smooths everything over, tries to stop the arguments, tries to keep everybody happy. But of course, that's not really the truth of who I am, but it was just what my programming was. So I was doing that not only within my relationships, I was also doing it with, so by the time that this all started to come up and I started to have panic attacks and the rest of it, I was then in my early 30s, by which time my son was probably 5 or 6. And it started to come up in my family, how all of that dynamic played out. And then it starts to come up in social situations where I didn't feel like I had a voice, because I felt embarrassed to talk in front of people. If there was a group of people, I was fine talking one-to-one, but if it was a group of people, then I didn't have the confidence to speak. Even if it's a group of friends, I still found it very difficult to speak. So, and at work, I would always be the one that's like, give it to Sandra, she'll do it. And so there was this martyr thing within me about, that everybody will think I'm the good girl, so I'll do that because everybody will love me because I'm doing all the work. And so, of course, eventually, after years and years and years of doing everything for everybody, something's got to give. And so for me, I was continually losing my voice, which is very interesting because I wasn't speaking up. So it's all working through the throat chakra. So this stress, I was getting overwhelmed and stressed, and at work, everything was becoming too much to cope with. My son didn't sleep until he was 4, 5. So I think it started off when he was quite young. So I was then not sleeping properly. So the combination of not sleeping and all of those things, eventually something's going to shift. So I went through a space of having panic attacks. I didn't really want to leave the house. This was for a couple of years. And what really shifted and changed me was deciding, after trying all sorts of things, antidepressants, group therapy, normal counseling, nothing was making any difference whatsoever. And then I thought, I'm going to try hypnotherapy. And that was the beginning of where everything started to shift. Because, of course, what you're then doing, and I didn't realize this at the time, but what you're doing is you're shifting and changing your programs. And so when we start to look at stress from that perspective, we realize that stress mostly comes from our own beliefs, not really from any actual truth. Because we can put this two people in the same situation. One person will find it hugely stressful, and the other person will be going, well, what are you stressed about? There's nothing to worry about, because it's all subjective. It's all based on our own experiences as to what we perceive as stressful or not. And all of that comes from within us. Now, some of that comes from the core of who we are, because of course we have got different makeups. Some of us are more sensitive to stress and noise than others. Some people like loud noises and being out with lots of people, and others just naturally are more quiet and just like to be in quiet locations. So some of that is part of our truth of who we are, as to what our choices are in terms of what we like. And then we make choices as to, do we want to put ourselves in that situation where we're feeling a bit overwhelmed because it's a nightclub and I don't like noise, it's, so those are choices. But a lot of the time the internal stresses, the majority of the internal stresses are things that have happened along the way that have created a belief system for us. So every thought that we have, we are able to choose. And it's a process, because we don't realize we can choose those thoughts. When we first start to become aware of the fact that there is an observer of our thoughts, we don't realize, we think we are our thoughts when we first start to be on this program, on this journey. We start off when we're not conscious to the fact that we are in more control of this. Our reality isn't perhaps what we've always thought it was. We're programmed to think that basically we lead from our mind. We make choices from our thoughts, and so everything is logic, and it's like what do a list of fors and against, so it makes everything logical. And then there's a gut feeling that's going, but that doesn't feel right. But we're actually programmed and taught to shut that down and not follow our hearts. Well, that's great if you're trying to control people. But if you're actually wanting to really step into your truth, this becomes the servant, and the heart and the gut become the master. So when we start to really understand that our higher truth comes from our hearts, comes from our intuition, and we can start to observe our thoughts, then we can start to really work on those stress levels, because the stress levels are coming from the programming of what we think we should be thinking about, what we think we should believe, how we think we should respond. So, for example, if you've got a situation where you've always been taught that, or you've grown up in an environment where you've got a dad, for example, who's gone out to work and he's worked really hard every day of his life, and he gets back late, and that's what puts the food on the table. Then you're running a program of, I have to work hard to make money. But actually that's a program, because we don't have to work hard. We have to work smart. We don't have to necessarily work hard. And so, but if you're running that program, then you start to have all of these other internal stresses that come up, where if you're not working hard, you feel guilty, you feel shame, you feel all of these negative thoughts and feelings that create stress in our bodies, because we're not aligning ourselves to that program, that we're not working hard, and therefore we're not good enough, and then we're not living up to our own ideal idealistic perception of who we need to be. So it's really important to observe these programs. So when I started to become more aware, and I had the hypnotherapy, and then it still took me a little while to start. So I felt better, and I was like, this is great. I'm back to normal again, and everything's fine. But the moment of real change for me was at a party with my ex-husband, and it was a lot of people who were there who were his friends. It was a colleague of his who he worked with. And so I didn't know anybody, and I felt a bit of a fish out of water. And I was standing at the bar with somebody else who felt equally as awkward as I did, somebody's husband. And so we're making small talk. And this person said to me, so what do you enjoy? What are your hobbies? And I couldn't think of a single one thing I did that wasn't for somebody else. And I had this moment of realization of, I don't know who I am. I've got absolutely no idea. I know that I go and do this with this son, and I go and do this with this son, and I go on boating holidays with my then husband because he loves boating. I couldn't stand it, but I did it because that's just what we did. I kept banging my head every time the kids wanted more toys, and I had to keep going down. And I was just like, it wasn't a relaxing holiday in any way at all. So all of these things I was doing because everybody else wanted me to do them. And the things that I loved, which were dancing, painting, singing, all of these creative things, I hadn't done for years because I'd shut them all down, because they were something that I played with, and I didn't have time now for this part of myself. And it really haunted me, this realization of, I don't know who I am. What happened to me? How did I disappear? And of course, no wonder you're stressed when all you're doing is trying to stop everybody. So all you're doing is trying to put out fires all the time, trying to keep everything from crashing, because it was a difficult family dynamic. And so my role in life was just to keep everybody else happy and just keep everything calm. I was like, well, that's not much of a life. That's interesting. So I started to observe my thoughts, and I started hearing myself saying things and thinking, why do I say that? That's not even what I think. That was my mum. My mum used to say that to me. I was like, oh, interesting. And the more I observed this, the more I could hear myself. And I'm thinking, I even parent like my mum. I say that, and I had to really tune into, what do I think and feel? So I started to shift and change. And of course, that's not always easy, because it then creates external stress, because everybody's like, well, who are you? You're not the person I married. So, and of course it is, when we're going through these shifts and changes, it is difficult. And it's hard for other people to experience that when they know you for being a certain version of you. And it is stressful, but it is absolutely worthwhile going through that process of clearing those limiting beliefs, clearing those programs. And it's an ongoing piece of work. It's not something that I've been doing it now for close on 25 years, I think it must be. And it still comes up in layers, because we have layers of beliefs, not only in this lifetime, but also ancestral beliefs, past lifetimes. We have all of this stuff that we bring in with us, and we're acting out all of this programming on an unconscious level. And when we understand that, when we look at an iceberg and you see that 10% of the iceberg is above water and 90% of it is below, that's the same as our conscious mind and our unconscious mind. So we think that what is running us is our thoughts that we are observing here, but actually what's running us is the 90% that we don't know. And so it's starting to observe and starting to respond and being the observer of those thoughts that starts to give us the signals as to what we can shift and change. So I went through a continuous process of, when I felt something was stressful or felt something that was uncomfortable, I would observe it within myself. And I remember having a conversation with my dad when I was very young, actually, probably about 14 or 15, and saying, I know that I'm never going to die because I can observe myself thinking. So therefore, my thoughts and my awareness, my consciousness must be separate to my thoughts. And so I utilize this thought that I had when I was younger, and I thought, well, if I'm this consciousness and I can observe it, then I can also control it. So let's just see what happens. And so I started to observe it, and when these thoughts started to come up, it would be in all sorts of different things. But once you start to notice, you really start to notice, and then you can start to shift and change these things, and then it comes up in layers. And it doesn't mean to say that the stress disappears immediately, but what it does mean is that you can start to be in more control of it. And you can start to, when you have a response to something, you can go, ah, I see you again. I know who you are. That's that belief that I've got that I'm not worthy. And so therefore I've got to say this because I need to make you happy. But actually, I don't think and feel that at all. So what is my truth? So, okay, I'm going to just rewind this. And the most important things to do is just to try and take that time to pause so that you have that response, because our body feels the responses first. Whenever we know that we're going into a stressful situation or something's coming up in us, we feel it before we think it. Our body always is going to know before our thoughts do. There's like a feedback loop that's going on between our mind and our body. So you will feel it somewhere in your body. You'll feel a knot of anxiety on your tummy, or you'll feel a tightness in your chest. And then you'll start to have the thought that comes up from that. And of course, it takes practice. And even now, after doing it for years, I still sometimes find it's a day later and I go, oh, hang on a minute. That was interesting. There's a new one. So, because it does come up in layers. But what tends to happen, what I've found happened is that bit by bit, as you're clearing these layers, you just start to feel lighter. You start to feel that you don't have to be quite so in that space of wanting everybody to agree with you, wanting everybody to like you, wanting everybody to understand everything that you need to say. It's like, it's okay. I'm trusting that this is right for me. And if you don't hear me at the level that I'm talking at, in terms of, you and I are just on different, you've got one perspective and I've got another, that's okay, because you've got your whole set of beliefs and structures, and I've got my set of beliefs and structures. I might not be right. I might be right for me, but I might not be right for you. And when we can let go of that need to prove ourselves to everybody all the time, it starts to make it so much easier, because we don't feel like we have to continually, because it's stressful trying to actually get everyone to agree with us. It's stressful to try to prove that we're right. It's all of those things create stress within our bodies. They create stress in our energetic field. They create stress in our minds, because we're holding on to so much, because we're then validating ourselves through other people's perspectives. And the only way we can validate ourselves is from within ourselves. It's a really big shift when we start to realize that we don't need people to like us. We don't need people to agree with us. And actually, the more that we try to do that, the more that we actually are creating such an enormous amount of stress and weight for ourselves that it's hard. It's hard to bear. And you become the weight on our shoulders from holding the burden of always wanting to please others. And especially on this path, a lot of people that are going to be listening to this are going to be healers, therapists, or even if they're not working in that field, they've always been empathic, and so they've always had that tendency to sense other people's emotions and want to make it right. But we can't. We can. The only responsibility we have is to ourselves, and of course we want to facilitate the healing for others, but we aren't responsible for the healing for others. So I think a big stress release for most of the people that will be listening to this call will be about the understanding and the realization that we might want to save the world, but actually the best way we can do that is by healing ourselves, and to really releasing our own stress, clearing our own trauma, clearing our own ancestral beliefs that we brought in, and working on all those different levels to do that. But the tool that I've always found the most important one for me, and this is why it's interesting with Jade, because Jade's always worked through the body, and connected it from that perspective, but I've always worked through the mind and the inner child. So one of the things that I found extremely powerful is to, when I have something come up, is to start asking those questions and go, okay, that's interesting, because I've observed this now as a limiting belief. So I'll give you an example. I had something, because it'd be good for you to have a think about what comes up for you right now in terms of this type of question. So something that happened for me this week was that I've done about 10 days, which was very intense with quite a lot of learning, some real amazing downloads, lots of insights. And by Sunday night, I was on a massive high. And because I'd had these, like, you know, when you're just so excited about having something that's new that's coming in. This is just so exciting. Come on a massive high. Monday morning, I felt like I'd literally been dropped from a great height. I was like, what's this? What is this energy that's coming in? Because now I'm observing the energy. So I know that something is, if there's an energy that's shifting through me that feels uncomfortable, it's something that is ready to be released from my physical body, because every experience is held within our cells as a cellular memory. So everything that we're holding on to is going to be released through the body. So when I start to feel the energy of something coming up, which feels uncomfortable, I'm like, I'm feeling a bit depressed. This is a bit interesting. And it's not like there's something in my life that's created this. So it's not an external stress that's happened. This is something coming from within. So when that starts to come up, what I would have done before would be, I'm feeling really miserable. It must be because of that. And I'm not happy with this. And that part of my life is miserable. And, and all of a sudden you've got in this downward spiral where everything in your life is terrible and you just want to throw everything away. But because I know that's not the case, I was observing it as an energy. And so then I'm observing it and thinking, okay, well, this feels very stressful to hold in my body, but what is it? And so I started to sort of observe my thoughts around it, because whenever you've got something that's coming up as an energy that's working through you, it will give you the matching thoughts that are appropriate to feel that. So I started having quite negative thoughts about situations in the past and things that were coming up, and I was just observing it whilst feeling it, because it was quite an intense process. And the whole day I was thinking, like, something's brewing. I just need to wait. And it's been very interesting, because working with Jade, where she's so much into the body, and which is why she's creating the whole wellness side of this from a very, very empowered physical perspective, but also incorporating a lot of the mind perspective as well. But she knows exactly how to really be aligned with your body. And so I'm really stepping into this with her, because it's never been how I've really worked, but I know that it's a part of me that I need to approach. So we've been doing all of these different, having all these different conversations, and having all of these, Jay's been sending us lots of information through, so we've been ordering supplements and various different things. And I realized I was in a real place of resistance, because although my mind wants to do it, something in my unconscious is going, no, you're not worthy of looking after yourself. No, you're not going to take those supplements because Steve should have those. Steve, my husband, Steve should have those because his need is greater, and we can't afford for both of us, so you have them. And yes, but I haven't got the time to be able to spend on planning my week's food, so I'll just have something quick. That'll be fine. And that's how I've lived for a very long time, because I know that I've had some real issues around self-worth with my body because of some stuff that went on when I was younger. And you think you've cleared things in layers, and I hadn't realized. And I was just going to bed, and I turned around to Steve and I went, oh my goodness, I'm not worthy of giving myself any care on my body. I'll do all the work in my mind, but my body is not worthy of any care. So I resist it. I've been putting an active barrier to looking after my well-being physically. And it was quite a shock to see it, because it was the allowance of that experience, the allowance of that energy coming through, and the observation of it that allowed it to come up to see what it actually was. Whereas what we tend to do when we feel those, we wake up, and we all have those days, we're waking up like, oh, I'm feeling really rubbish today. But there's a tendency to just spiral down with that and feel that it's something in our lives that's external. But actually, quite often, what it is our body screaming for help to say, I'm ready to get rid of this now. Can you just give me some attention so we can clear this? So, most of our stressors are coming from within. And quite often, they are our body's way of trying to give us information. But we tend to think that there's something else. So, the more that we have this real radical inquiry to our thoughts, our conscious awareness, the more that we can start to shift and change. So I've chatted quite a lot about all of that. So I think you can see where I'm going with these whole concepts of the understanding of this. So do either of you have any questions or any thoughts or about awarenesses about how that, anything that you would like to sort of add or ask from how you've experienced this in your lives?
Oh, okay. I recognise everything that you spoke about. I haven't experienced very much in my own life, but I do see it with my clients. My sister's been in America for 27 years, and she came home 18 months ago, and we've been quite close. But going up to Scotland with her and spending 10 days with her, I withdrew a little bit, and because she's very Americanized, and she lives with that. We're who we are. So anything we feel has got to have an exterior cause. And if I try to say anything to her, she says, no buts, no buts. And she doesn't want to enter into my thought processes. So I know that I'm not going to change her. I have to just drop hints and wait for her to pick something up. And then maybe we can go into it that way. Because if I try to explain anything to her, she doesn't want to know. So that's brought up some bits and pieces in me over these 10 days that I'm going to be working on, which has been really interesting because I've not really gone through any sort of problems, really. I was born a rebel. I stayed a rebel. My mum was very difficult person to get on with, but I recognised that we were chalk and cheese. As long as I didn't upset her, as long as I wasn't rude to her, I didn't have to do what she said. I wouldn't go necessarily against her as such, but I would do it in my way when I was ready. And she knew that, and it annoyed her no end. My dad was very spiritual, but didn't know it. So it was always like I felt I had my dad's backing, whatever happened. Yeah. And so however I was born, I'm very, very, very grateful for. And I've enjoyed my life the whole time. And I've always been aware of the choices and I knew that everything I did was a choice.
Yeah.
And that was from it. My mum used to say to me when I was about 2 or 3, oh, the trouble with you think you know everything. And all I wanted to say to her was, but I do. But if you'd have said to me, well, what do you know? Well, I don't know what I know. I just know. So I do really appreciate my position, whatever I came in as and with. But everything you've said, I totally understand. I mean, I love archetypes when you're talking about being the victim, people please, and all this sort of thing. I love getting people to recognise their archetypes. And I always say we need to clear past lives and ancestry before we can really start working on with people, because anything you've got coming in from there, if you clear something in the middle, you're still getting that drip feed from those lines. So if we can clear those to start with, then we can actually look at the person themselves. And in the child work, I get people to do themselves because it's comparatively simple once you understand the processes.
It is. And this is what's really important about all of this, is knowing that actually this is not actually that complicated. And the processes are really quite simple and you can do them. You don't have to keep on. This is the whole thing about the empowerment. It's that we've got the ability to do all of this for ourselves. We don't need to hand our power over and go for counselling once a week for the next 20 years. This is all very easy. Well, I say it's easy. The processes are easy. The application is challenging when you've got stuff that's coming up that you need to work through. It's a process, but it's hugely rewarding, because
Yeah.
the version of you that comes out the other side of it is not recognizable from the version of you that you were before. And I know this from my experiences, that I just would not have spoken up about anything, and now it's hard to actually get me to shut up most of the time. So it's but it's not from a place of wanting to convince anybody of anything.
No.
Actually, just from a place of absolute passion and wanting to just share my own experiences, and knowing you can feel so much better if you do these simple things and you just do them regularly, and you start to adopt them as just a way of living.
Yeah.
And this is what's so important, is it's not that, it really isn't that difficult.
I've had two people lately that have said to me, would you be my teacher? And I have to say, no. I'm happy to guide. I'm happy to be a mentor. But at the end of the day, you have to do the work. You will always have my support, and maybe a little sign to point you in a different direction. But we talk about it, and it's everything is your decision. It's not down to me. And I always finish off saying to my clients, I haven't told you anything you didn't know. You just didn't know you knew it.
No, exactly.
And
All of it, everything is about the remembrance within us of more of our truth. And we're just uncovering that layer by layer. And what you were saying about the ancestral lines and the genetics and the past lives, all of that stuff, it's so important, I think, to when we realize that there's a point of creation for everything. And if we don't go back to the point of creation, it's still going to keep seeping through. And that's what you're talking about, is that you can clear it here in this now moment, but if we actually haven't cleared it through the timelines, then it's going to come back further down the line. So we have to clear it on all of those different levels. So yeah, absolutely, totally agree with you. And we can, as healers, my belief is that we can facilitate people to help themselves, so that they have the understandings and have somebody holding space for them, but they do the healing themselves.
yeah.
It's and I feel like the days of the gurus almost need to be, we need to put that behind us, because again, we're just giving our power away to somebody else to fix us. And
Yeah.
we just need to have the tools to be able to fix ourselves. And this is what's so important, is for us to know that it's all within us. We have all of the knowledge, we have all of the ability. We just need somebody to show us, shine a light on it for us, so we can see where to find it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. It's so interesting as well with your sister that, of course, when you're growing up, that's probably the one person who's going to trigger you the most, because you've got that shared experience, and so it's interesting how that's come together, and you've observed situations within that process that you take away to actually observe that dynamic from a different perspective, because obviously it's a long time ago, so it's shifted, and as you've both grown in slightly different ways, and now you're shifting yourself in relation to that. So
Yeah, because the way, I mean, obviously you've got the healers in America as well, but my brother-in-law was in banking. Then he went into he was director of a department in the university. So she's lived in that sort of world. And a lot of it, you can see the programs that she's taken on since she's been there. And it's I can only suggest, and I can talk to my brother-in-law a lot easier, because he's having hypnotherapy for the stress that he's been under. And she just sort of said, well, go and speak to Abby, go and speak to Abby whenever he comes up with anything. But she, because the other thing I do is a lot of reflection. If something annoys me in somebody else, I have to go in and find out what it is in me that's on that same sort of thing. It's either a reflection of something in me, or it's showing me something. And it was almost like I kept feeling that she was always right. She knew everything. So of course now I'm home. I've got to sit down and think, so why do I feel that she's always right? Do I feel that I'm always right? It's looking at the things that I'm seeing in her. It's nothing to do with her. I know they're reflections of things in me. So that's what I've got to work on now, which is quite interesting.
No, absolutely it is. And I think you often find this with close family members. They're the ones that are going to trigger you the most, because we have got them in our lives because of the frequency that they're resonating at. We've drawn that into us, or we've chosen before we've come into this experience to be with them through our lives, because they are there to show us and teach us. And so they're the ones that really are going to be pushing us to go within, and it's like myself and Steve, we have this thing where both of us think we're right all the time. So we both
They can't be right when we know we
it's not necessarily, it's an interesting thing, because I think both of us are, because what we often say at the end of it is we're both vociferously agreeing with each other, because we're both actually saying the same thing, but we're saying it in a slightly different way, and then we realize that we're actually agreeing at the end anyway.
yeah.
It's just that we've got different perspectives on how we actually bring that information through. So it's really interesting that the dynamic with our family members is certainly one to really notice. And it's that whole the blame thing is really important, to be like you've just done. It's to take responsibility and not think that it's always that person's fault, because it's so easy to say I'm stressed because that person did this and that person did that. But actually the reason we're stressed is because there's something that's triggered us in us that we haven't looked at, something that's unhealed. So it's exactly what you said. Once we get that reflection back, if something's really made us feel emotional about something or upset about something, that's the time to really observe that and look at, why did that hurt me? What was it that was said that made me react like that? Why did that make me angry? And then we can bring the inner child work in and start to go, so when was the first time I felt like this? When was the last time I felt, all of this that we know that we can do, where we can start to ask ourselves those questions. And it's a simple process, and all we need to do really is to close our eyes and ask the questions, and those thoughts those scenarios will be shown to us in a feeling, in a memory that just will come up, because our subconscious knows exactly what's created it, and it wants you to see, because it wants you to let go of it. So it's really powerful when we actually know that we have the power to shift all of that. So yeah, thank you. Karina, is there anything that you would like to ask?
Yes, I would like to just share a few things. I'm gonna keep my camera off just because I'm very happy that my Zoom didn't shut down during this call, because it
It's okay.
keeps doing that lately, and I don't know why. So I've resonated with a lot of things you shared, Sandra, and I have been doing a lot of work on myself, and I really like just doing energy work and going into the mind, listening to that voice that says all sorts of things. And it's probably, like you say, it comes up from our upbringing. And I can't say that my parents were not loving, but I think they were kind of a generation that they consider to show their love something wrong, because if you show it, at least that's why my mom said to me, if you tell the child that you love it, then the child is going to misbehave, and it's better not to, and only show it when the child sleeps at night. So you don't really share the love. So I probably felt that, and I was also very, like, because of that, I was very subservient. I was like people pleasing, trying to get love, trying to be accepted by people. But what I feel that the reason I got into this work, it was because on a soul level, the soul feels like enough is enough. You just have to show the world who you really are, and you can't just accept anymore whatever labels are placed on you, and you just have to do the work. And since I've been doing the work, it's probably, like you've experienced it as well. There are good days and bad days, but the bad days are not as bad as they used to be. You really get to, because of the awareness, the energy, the way, to shift it, it doesn't last for that long.
No.
It's amazing. So really feeling empowered by doing this kind of work. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's really interesting to what you said there is a really important point, is that it's not that you don't have those down days, because those down days are there where you have those sort of lower energy days and you're feeling a little bit low, but it's because you're just going through another layer. And the important thing is that when you have the tools, they do pass quickly. So because when you don't have the tools and you're in that space, you can be in that spiral of depression for months, years, and you don't come out of that space. Whereas when you've got the tools, it passes in a day or a couple of hours, and the next day you wake up and everything's back to normal again, and you're back in the higher frequency. And what's wonderful is that every time we're clearing something, we're raising our frequency, and then of course we're creating more space for those higher frequencies to come in, and then we have more understanding. Our gifts and our talents, or all of those things, start to become more accessible to us, because we're actually raising our frequency to higher information. So as we're clearing out one part, of course, whatever you create space for, you have to fill it with something. So you're creating it with those higher information. And so we're raising our frequency, and this work that we're doing on ourselves is ultimately raising the frequency for the collective. It's raising the frequency for the planet, which is right now extremely crucial, given the transition that we're going through at the moment. It's crucial that we do this, and we do this work on ourselves, because it's the greatest service that we can do for humanity, is to do the work for ourselves, so that we can shine our light, so we can align ourselves to the truth of who we are, which is these beautiful divine beings of light who have just forgotten that's who we are. And so it's like you were saying earlier, Leslie, it's reminding you of who you are. It's not actually learning anything at all, because everything is within us. We are beautiful creator beings that have got the ability to be whatever we choose to be. And we're these beautiful multifaceted diamonds, but we've got covered in coal. So we're just chipping off the coal so that our little bits of light can start to, oh, somebody just coming in. I think he's a little late, but yeah. So yeah, these wonderful beautiful facets that we are, and we're not shining our light. So when we do shine our lights, and when we start to just like polish away and polish away, and clear these limiting thoughts, of course much more of who we are is coming to the surface. And so when people see that, and we start to attract different people towards us, so everything starts to shift and change as we're letting go of those limiting beliefs, and those internal stressors start to then become our friends, because they're the signposts showing us where to look. Hello, Amal.
Hello.
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 Hi, we're actually sort of a little way, quite a way in now, but you're very welcome to join us, and we'll make sure you get the recording. So
Thank you. Okay.
we've just been talking about all sorts of different levels of stress with mindset, and how we're clearing limiting beliefs, and the work how we can perceive that through our lives. And we're just talking about how when we clear that, actually you're starting to raise your frequency and you're creating that space. And so it's not only that you start to feel that you have just more control over your emotions, because the stress isn't quite so triggering, because you're not triggered as much, because you've healed those parts of yourselves. So less things bother you, less things externally are triggering you. So there's less things that you're actually having the stress response to. But also we're able to then see things from a higher perspective, because we're allowing in more information, we're remembering more of those parts of ourselves. And this is what we're saying about those facets, those different facets. And there's so much more that we've got to connect to. And as the frequencies on the planet are raising, and the light that it's coming on in at the moment, there's so much light that's coming in, as we're going through this photon belt, where we're bombarded continually with this high frequency of light right now. We've got access to an opportunity to shift and change more than we've ever had in the last something like 5,000 years. So this is an enormous period of opportunity for us to really step into more of our truth and align ourselves. And so we're shifting and changing. So what we were just saying is the that the biggest service we can do is to do this work on ourselves and to really work with those internal stresses. So so is there anything particular, Amalis, you've only just come in, we were sort of really coming to the end really, so was there anything particular that you would like to ask, that you would like me to talk about?
No, I was just curious and wanted to just be part of it, but had other things going on. So thank you.
No worries, absolutely fine. What we can do is oh, did you get the link through Thrivecart?
I'm not sure
Did you get the
actually.
link through I'll find out where you got the link from, and I can make sure that you get the recording so that you can listen to it afterwards. Okay.
Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you so much.
No problem at all. So so next week we're going to be talking about more from the body perspective. We're going to be looking at the regulation of the nervous system. We're going to be looking at how the breath can work. We can work with the breath with it to assist with regulating. We're going to be looking at all the different stresses on the body. So Jade is going to be speaking more about that. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the call, Jade would have been here today, and it would have been about both aspects, but Jade unfortunately is poorly with COVID at the moment. So and we've actually had an interesting conversation around stress with that, because of course illness is something where you can choose how you respond to that. Because if you have an illness, whatever it is, I mean, with Jade it's COVID at the moment, but she's been enjoying the process of allowing the universe to show her through that experience what she needs to heal. And what the conversation we were having earlier, which we'll touch on more next week, is that you only get these things when it's showing you something, when you're not listening. And so the universe will come in and go, okay, well, you're going to have this illness, or you're going to have this accident, because you need to stop and you need to pause, because you need to listen to this. And so of course what happens most of the time is people try and work through their illness, and then they keep on being repeatedly ill because they're not taking any notice, and they feel more and more stressed because they're feeling they're having to work underneath this load that they're feeling really terrible. And so it becomes stressful, and you're not learning anything. You're just going through the process feeling extremely stressed, absolutely exhausted. The whole thing will take longer to work through your system. Whereas if you actually honor that as a learning experience, and you know that through that you're being shown something, it allows you to open up to downloads of information, to insights, to understandings. And when you're open to this, it shifts it through so much more quickly. And you can see, so you can either have, so every situation that happens, your response to it, your internal response to stress will actually dictate your experience. So so next week we're going to be talking about that, because Jade can talk to you about that from her perspective of everything that's gone on this week, because it's been quite interesting. And we're going to be looking at all of those different physical stresses, or how we deal with physical stress in the body. So we decided to divide it into part 1 and part 2. So this was part 1. So I will send you through the recording, Amal, so that you've had it. And if you would like to join us again next week, we always have something going on every Thursday. Normally both of us are here, but next Thursday between 12:30 and 1:30 every Thursday lunchtime, there'll be some sort of topic of empowered wellness, empowered healing. It'll be a different topic every week. So for those of you that are in the local area, so we're in near Maidstone. We have a programme starting in person in Westmoreland on the 25th of October, which is going to be called Align and Shine. And we're going to be going through all of the energy centres and looking at it from a mindset perspective, from a physical perspective, and working with breath work. And I work with light language and light code. So I'm going to be helping to clear what's you're ready to let go of in those energy centres. And then I'm going to be bringing in codes to help you to upgrade the frequency of those centres. It's an 8-week programme, and that's starting on the 25th of October. So if any of you are interested in that, please reach out to me and let me know, and I can send you through the details when we have them. I only agreed the premises yesterday, so it's very new information. So yeah, so that's, if you want to be, then Jade and I are working together, and it looks at it from all perspectives, and this is what we're looking to do, is encompass all of this from the mind, the body, the spirit, and work together with all of those to really shift and align us into something which is a much more authentic version of who we are, to just live with more peace and happiness and joy in our lives. So thank you for joining me today. Before we go, is there anything that anybody else would like to add or say or ask?
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you for
thank you for joining me. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.